This is the Generation Report. I am Paul Zimmy Finn. Hope you're doing well. Since I addressed the latest discussion making the rounds about generations in the most recent episode, a loyal listener persuaded me to give a refresher on William Strauss and Neil Howe's work and insights before the next geriatric millennial-type headline makes its way around the world. That is what this episode will be. Strauss and Howe co-wrote 7 books, among them Generations, 13th Gen, The Fourth Turning, and Millennials Rising. The basis for Generations, their first collaboration, published in 1991, was to do something historians had never done before. Write a book comprised of life biographies of each of America's generations dating back to the English colonial settlements in the 17th century. In their years of research for the book, Strauss and Howe, by happenstance, noticed a recurring pattern in the kinds of generations that have followed each other in American history, as well as a close correlation between each type of generation and its age when certain events and trends were happening. Based on these 2 findings, Strauss and Howe concluded that the rhythm of social change in America is closely linked with the human life cycle and the process of generational aging, and that America was due to pass through its next great civic crisis early in the 21st century. These conclusions formed the basis for Strauss and Howe's signature work, The Fourth Turning, published in 1997, in which history is discussed as a recurring fourfold cycle just like the seasons in nature. The next winter season of American history, the great civic crisis augured back in Generations, would be a decisive era of secular upheaval, Strauss and Howe wrote. This upheaval, they predicted, would converge with the era's generation alignment, boomers in old age, Xers in midlife, millennials in young adulthood, to propel the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. For those interested in a more detailed breakdown of the factors that create the cycles of history and generations, I recommend they check out episodes 3 through 7 of this series. My approach to explaining the mechanics of the cycles is somewhat different than Strauss and Howe's, but however the pieces are put together, the puzzle looks the same at the end. The core assertion of The Fourth Turning, and by extension of all of Strauss and Howe's collaborations, is history shapes generations, and generations shape history. The majority of the discussions about generations in American history have been steeped in the same perspectives for so long, however, that deviating from the norm invariably brings skepticism, dismissal, and disparagement. The New York Times reviewed The Fourth Turning just after it was published and demonstrated as much, saying, "Cyclical theories tend to end up in the Sargasso Sea of pseudoscience." That's quite an alliteration. But all the denunciation of Strauss and Howe's scholarship for being apparently unsubstantiated by evidence falls flat when balanced against the overabundance of sweeping inconsistencies and ridiculous stories about generations, which aren't subjected to the same criticism. Popular history, the kind we see in movies and documentaries and on news programs, tells us that generations are formed by their connection with historical events: the JFK assassination, Vietnam, the moon landing, Woodstock. But if generations are created by events, which events create them, and who decides which ones for each generation? Public opinion surveys infer that generations are identified simply by demographic cohorts whose birth year spans are seldom given justification. But if generations are demographic groups that can be settled on without justification, why has there been wild inconsistency in placing when the generation after millennials was born? If empiricism and evidence is absolutely crucial to legitimate discussions about generations, how did the geriatric millennial meme make its way onto the Today Show and into the Times in London? And if the dividing lines between generations are pretty arbitrary, to quote The Atlantic in February 2020, what's the use in profiling generations at all? Sooner or later, the series of narratives accepted in the mainstream about generations falls apart under the weight of its own logical incoherence. And revealingly, serious reviews of Strauss and Howe's work have given testament to its value, even when criticizing it. From David Brooks' 2000 review of Millennials Rising in the New York Times. This is not a good book, if by good you mean the kind of book in which the authors have rigorously sifted the evidence and carefully supported their assertions with data. But it is a very good, bad book. It's stuffed with interesting nuggets, it's brightly written, and if you get away from the generational mumbo-jumbo, it illuminates changes that really do seem to be taking place. It illuminates changes that really do seem to be taking place. Sounds an awful lot like what Business Insider had to say about the fourth turning on January 9th of this year. It's unclear whether the fourth turning, as Howe and Strauss characterized it, really is happening right now, but the parallels are certainly eye-catching. The parallels are no coincidence. What drives the cycle of history is the process of generational change. What creates generations is not wars, depressions, pandemics, or demographic birth rates, but the seasonal rhythm of history. As groups of people born over a specific period of time with their own characteristic attitudes and behaviors and who leave a specific imprint behind, generations are both recognizable and distinct. And finally, we are in an era of civic crisis today because it has been the length of a lifetime since America's last one. Any remaining question of whether or not Strauss and Howe's scholarship and their generational theory have been borne out by the evidence has a ready answer. Look around. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone important to you. Thank you for listening, and may God bless America.